So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here in person. I'm Harley. I work at SeaAhead. We have partnered with MakeTimeFlow and Tom at NewViewMedia. Thank you, Tom, as always, to run this DeepCurrents series. Really excited to, bring more light to entrepreneur wellness. It's a really important thing that we're thinking about. How are we maximizing our time? How are we being the most productive, especially as entrepreneurs when these things can get a little bit blurry? So it's been a great partnership thus far with these folks here, and really excited to have our first learning session as a part of this series. We kicked this off with one of our Blue Swell founders a couple months ago, did an interview with Allison Rogers of Useful, which was really great, dug into how she makes uses her time as an entrepreneur, how she thinks about productivity and wellness as a founder. So really excited to dive more deeply into some of these topics. A little bit of background on SeaAhead. So we are an organization that supports venture innovation for the ocean. So we do that by supporting startup companies through our programs. We run an incubator program here in Cambridge in partnership with the New England Aquarium. We also run an accelerator program down in Mississippi with the University of Southern Mississippi. So both of those programs are running currently right now. We also invest in startup companies. So we have a Blue Angels investment group. So we bring together investors who are interested in blue tech, ocean industries, learning more about those industries. And we're currently raising a fund as well. So really excited for this series. If you have any other questions about SeaAhead or the work that we are doing, please come to me and my colleague, Sophie. We'd be happy to talk to you. And I will hand it off.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Harley. Nice to see everyone. Thank you for coming. By coming at 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon, you've already demonstrated some real strengths in time management and scheduling, so I appreciate that. It's also wonderful to see everyone interested in something that I think is actually of one of the essential skills that people need in the modern day. Not just to succeed, but I think to thrive, which is really one of the things that we're hopeful for. I was really grateful to SeaAhead. It's been a wonderful collaboration that we've been able to have with them. We greatly admire not just that they are tackling really important problems, including climate change, as well as creating sustainable ocean ecosystems, but they also have a focus on sustainability for their entrepreneurs, which they support as well. That was a breath of fresh air, where sometimes you feel that it's an afterthought and they'll throw yoga or a meditation session, which you will then feel worse about for not being able to attend because you're feeling so busy. Sometimes the approach that we've seen organizations take, they take a very different view of it and something that's really long-term, and it's been delightful to work with them, not just in doing the DeepCurrents series, which we'll talk a little bit more about later of what's coming, but also to be working directly with their entrepreneurs. So why are we here? So Hallie and I are the co-founders of MakeTimeFlow, and our mission statement is really to develop a platform to support human flourishing. We'll talk a little bit more about what exactly that means. But I would say that in a nutshell, what we have really tried to focus on doing is to create a platform for balanced super productivity for people who are trying to change the world. I think it easily fits well with SeaAhead. There's some other groups that we're working with that this really aligns with as well. And we're hoping that it does for most of the people that we engage with here at the CIC. It's been a tremendous group to get to know, bump into the hallways, and then go, wow, we have a really shared mission there. That's the focus of what we've been doing. We often talk about our larger mission statement, but always in the context of what are we focused on now, right? So what we're focused on now is really helping people move from this crazy busy environment to feeling crazy good. Right? We'll talk a little bit about why there's evidence to say that we can do this. And there's research to show that there's tremendous gains for you, not just in the quality of your life, but also in the ability for you to do better work. Hey, wait a minute. We were going to talk about maximizing impact. We're going to talk about that. There are going to be some assumptions and expectations that I have for what you have brought today. And we'll talk a little bit about goals that we'll have for you when you're leaving. This is one of a series of 8 DeepCurrents sessions. These DeepCurrents sessions are both conversations with startup founders, people who are successfully doing things that many of us would admire and want to learn from. And they're also going to be frank and open about challenges that they've had. So far, it's been a wonderful sort of discussion. This is then alternated every session with a learning series, such as this one today. There's some big topics that we're going to try to cover. We're not going to cover all of them today, even though they may be relevant. The next series of learning sessions is going to be on flow and deep work. And specifically, how you can use flow even to do boring things, not just the super elite things, and how you can find time for deep work. The follow-on sessions are really focused on pragmatic personal planning, and then also how to lead and be part of thriving teams. So there'll be some things that I'll be pushing off, not diving into yet, even though I'll mention them for you. The hope is that you might join us for future sessions. Mostly, I'm just really delighted that you're here. I would say that MakeTimeFlow, why should I, as an internal medicine physician who's board certified in clinical informatics and has done most of my training in computer science and then in global health and social equity, be here today talking to you about productivity and time management? I'm here because I am not only those things and want to be an innovator, but also want to be a really great dad and want to be a really great partner. And that means that I had to do something differently, right? I was being crushed by this modern world, this productivity cycle that affected me not only in the innovation and entrepreneurship and in the work world, but especially in the medicine world, and then especially in the fact that I was never feeling like I did enough, right? I always knew there was more things that I could be doing, and I was sure I could be doing it better. So I had to develop some techniques to help me move from this really to try to move here. And where did I look for these things? And what are the things that I'm hoping to bring to you today? There's a lot of fantastic literature out there that's really been emerging lately that I hope some of you have already read, and we can exchange some ideas that have really worked for you. I'd love to hear those stories. This is really sort of thankfully has moved from the time management literature of business about like how you should do the obvious things like plan your day, right? And manage your calendar, to much more nuanced understandings through, I think, especially through Cal Newport's work, through deep work, and then lately his provocative A World Without Email, to work by Oliver Burkeman, focused on 4,000 weeks, really a manual for time management for mortals, right? So a huge spectrum there. We also, however, have to bring in, unfortunately, a few things from thermodynamics, really how do we understand time, right, to business and economic theory and organizational theory. Can you convince your boss that it's worth you having a decent quality of life and maybe doing something at work that's related to your other values and ventures? So we've got some research articles that will talk to you about why that's probably true. But all the way over to computer science and problem-solving theory, where the reason why you might choose to take time for yourself has a good theoretical basis for helping you find your impact maximum. A lot of theoretical jargon there, but we'll dive into it a little bit more. First, I wanted to start off with a few questions. We've got a wonderful group here. I'm sure there are a lot of insights. I'm going to try to make sure there's 10 to 15 minutes at the end so we can ask questions and then hopefully get some insights. The crowds who arrive here almost always have things that have not been working for them. That's important to know, but almost always have really cool insights about ways that they've gotten some of these techniques to really work for them. And I want to make sure we have time to hear that. But first off, we're just going to go through a series of questions, and I want to just raise your hand for something. We'll get to the end a few specifically rhetorical questions. All right, how many people think they don't have enough time in the day? Yeah, okay, great, a few. How many of you get sucked into the Alice in Wonderland rabbit holes of email? All right, a few. Social media, news, browsing, Netflix binge watching, maybe. Okay. How many of you have a tasking system? Okay, getting there. How many of you have more than one? Right. How many of you have a love-hate relationship with your tasking system? Yes. How many of you have a love-hate relationship with email or Slack? Yeah. How many of you have a love-hate relationship with your phones? How many of you don't get enough notifications in the day? Then finally, how did you spend your time yesterday or last week? How do you wish you had? Right? Is there a gap? Why is there a gap? Is there anything we can do about it? I've done a lot of work, not just in sort of this innovation system, but also doing a lot of coaching and advising. And I've had a few people show up for me without hope. And that's not great, right? They're often people who've like tried everything. Like, yeah, I've read all of Cal Newport's books. They show up and you're like, okay. And then they say, oh, I've tried it and nothing's stuck, right? So one of the expectations today is that at least if that's you, there's a different kind of conversation that we need to have. And you should definitely get together with me afterwards. Because we need to have a little bit of hope, right? A little bit of hope that there's something we can do that's different. And even if they haven't stuck before, almost always we try to explore a little bit of it, say, why didn't that work for you then? Right? And the idea of like, it's not worked for me yet. Right? So many of these techniques and a lot of the things that we talk about and why we've designed a system that's not just here, this device will fix your life for you. Or, oh, I'm going to tell you this thing in 2 minutes and it'll change your life. It doesn't work that way. These are behavioral changes, right? And they take time, they take practice. And then most of the time, it's not a linear path to great happiness, but it's a cyclical path. I practice it, then I get stressed, and I return to what I did before. But then the speed for me getting back up to it, like your strength training, is faster, right? And then it's faster and faster. So part of this advising and coaching that I do is to help people understand that there's this cyclical nature. And because you dip down again to your normal way of dealing with stressed times, it doesn't mean that you've failed completely. And you likely can get back into good practices much more quickly. Beyond those sort of less happy questions, I wanted to just imagine something a little bit differently. There was a lot of work that started to be done when we realized that measuring gross domestic product wasn't an awesome way to think about happy societies or societies you want to live in, right? Merely measuring the fact of how much money we exchange when we're doing transactions wasn't great. So a big project started. And hopefully some of you have read the World Happiness Report, which continues to be published. It's very interesting and very insightful. Through that work, we realized that most people are actually not super driven by happiness. We are for a bit, but then we quickly adapt. And so even the psychologists doing a lot of this work, trying to create validated studies, started to think about moving beyond happiness, right? There are writers that we won't get into today, but that are worth sort of really exploring here. And that was really led by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work in flow. Flow really being the study of optimal experience. You know, it's certainly something I want for my kids. It's certainly something I would love to explore more, and something I hope that we're all striving to, which is like, what does an optimal life experience look like? It turns out that there was a whole set of medical science that, despite doing multiple years of training and then practicing, I'd never heard of. And this was really the extension from psychology to not just being the treatment of disease, but a movement into positive psychology. And this understanding of like, even when you didn't have disease that was tremendously disrupting your life, there was this possibility of studying and understanding how people could do even better, right? Self-motivatedly so. And that's now led into this field called flourishing. Martin Seligman has been one of the leaders there, and he'd really done a lot of work on happiness, thinking that was the thing they needed to do. But he's admitted in his book on flourishing that really that was wrong. It has to be a much more nuanced approach. So I just wanted to make sure that we grounded our discussion here on impact and time management techniques on something a little bit grander than super productivity, right? Because it can be really pathological too. What's left for most people, though, is that they haven't had a good easy time to sit down and say, what does this really great life look like? What is flourishing? So flourishing has a nice sort of research definition, which means that a lot of the literature is being able to be developed around it. And that definition is an optimal range of human functioning, one that connotes goodness, generativity, growth, and resilience. Human flourishing is living within an optimal range of human functioning, right? This includes both in the emotional sphere, in the social sphere, and in the physical sphere. Right? So it's really a superset of generally what we focused on in healthcare. And people are starting to explore this across cultures and find measures that let us relate that across cultures. Great, but what does it feel like? Right? That's probably more what we care of. So they're starting to understand that flourishing people describe themselves as happy and satisfied. They see their lives as having a purpose. They feel some degree of mastery. Right? Not an ultimate degree, not ultimate control, that can be pathological in itself, some degree. They accept all parts of themselves, the strong parts as well as the parts that are not so strong. They have a sense of personal growth. They feel that they're always growing, evolving, and changing. and they have a sense of autonomy and an internal locus of control. They choose their fate rather than being victims of their fate. Great. That sounds very nice. Awesome. We wish we all had it. What evidence is there that it has any benefit, right? So there is lots of evolving evidence that there's lots of psychological benefits. Okay, that seems fairly obvious. But it's also that people have increased intuition. They have increased creativity. They have an increased way of broadening the thinking to do creative problem solving. There are psychological benefits, largely related to the simple things we can measure, blood pressure reductions. There seem to be a relationship to longevity, so living a longer and happier life. Sounds pretty awesome. And then there are lots of improved outcomes. The improved outcomes are not just at work in terms of engagement and productivity, but also in terms of more social relationships and a feeling of greater connectedness. So there's lots of data for you that I can point you to the papers for if you ever need to justify this to somebody to say why this matters, right? In a range of different outcomes in most of the places where we live. What does it mean for us, and why do I think that we should do it? Because there are these 5 dimensions that Martin Seligman, at least in his work, has been exploring. And this is why it's beyond happiness. Happiness lives here. Pleasant emotions and pleasant things. The P in PERMA. The other things that you need to address in order to really start to flourish or thrive are also addressing things related to engagement. Am I engaged in the things that I'm doing? Do I have meaningful relationships? Do I have time for them? Right? Am I involved in something that I feel has meaning and purpose? And then this final one was a really hard one because it's very outside. Am I achieving things? Am I with a group who's achieving things, right? Doesn't mean that you're winning, doesn't mean that you're at the top, but it's really, if you have things that are positive in each of these aspects, then you're going to be moving forward. That's why we work on a platform that essentially reinvents timers, right? But we do it in a way that we're trying to reestablish a relationship with it, to make sure that we have things that support you in each one of these areas, or at least help you to build an awareness of one, that this is there, and that it's meaningful and worthwhile investing in. Okay, but it's about impact, right? So what does this have to do with impact? Impact's a really tough term, right? It's going to be really dependent on not only your strengths and capabilities, right, but also in the environments in which you put in, right? So if one of the best examples in mathematics is, of course, Gauss, who's this child prodigy. If he was sent to work as a laborer, he would not have had the opportunity to develop the theories and techniques which he did, which transformed us, right? If Leonardo da Vinci or any of these other leaders were put into an environment where they were never allowed to grow or develop these talents, that would be a different one. We're not going to tackle those specific ones. What I'm assuming here is that each of you has arrived here with an interest in this, because if we could give you more time and more energy and less stress and space for you to work on what you think is most important, your impact in your life is very likely to increase, right? That's the assumption of today. I'm going to give you one technique, though, from some of the evidence about what you can do to improve your impact. I'm going to start with one now, and at the very end, we're going to cover another one that's used by giant tech companies sometimes and seems to have some evidence, but I think it has a tremendous impact in people's lives. The technique here to improve your impact is the emerging evidence of strengths, right? You're more likely to go further by embracing and extending your strengths than overcoming your weaknesses or challenge areas. While those are important to avoid disasters, you're going to get furthest here. There are 2 programs available online that you can do that can help you to understand some of this. You shouldn't be limited by them. You should take them with a big grain of salt, but they are helpful things for you to understand for yourself and the team members that you work with. So the one is through VIA, that's through Martin Seligman's work, and that's through the Positive Psychology website. We can send that to you afterwards as well. And the other one is done through the Gallup organization, and it's these Clifton Strengths finders. Okay, but there's a big but here. We need to start off with a hard dose of reality. And that's unfortunately brought to us by thermodynamics and neuroscience. All right, thermodynamics brings us this one, which is that your time is limited. Neuroscience brings us this one, which is that your attention is valuable. It's worth managing your time and attention is the thesis, right? But how valuable is it? So why does thermodynamics teach us about your time? Unfortunately, time and space are linked. It's still hard for me to wrap my mind around that. At the very large scale and the very small scale, it behaves really weirdly. Right? But at our scale, it seems that the second law of thermodynamics holds, right? So what's the second law of thermodynamics? We're quickly going back to high school physics. All right, so it's Not super poetic, but still philosophically deep. The second law is often stated as that heat goes from a hot object to a cold object, right? A more nuanced way is to say that entropy moves from an ordered to a less ordered system. What they're all talking about is directionality. And our best understanding right now, I think, JD, you can correct me, is that at the fundamental laws, it means that time moves in one direction. So far, we have no way to move back, right? And that means that time is your most limited resource. In a day, in a week, in a year, you can't make more time, unlike money. And nobody can come to you and give you more time in that year, right? That's what makes it so limited. There are ways you can extend your life, live healthier, be stronger. Unfortunately, we don't have effective ways, even I as a physician, of guaranteeing that, right? We're operating in a probabilistic world. So it's your most valued resources. Right? Not only that, but it's about 4,000 weeks. That's 80 years, right? That's roughly 80 years. That's not a lot of time. That means that we have to embrace constraints, right? It's not about the time that you spend in your chair. It's about the value and the effectiveness that you use to provide it. Okay, what does neuroscience teach us about our attention, and why is that a limit? Unfortunately, we're getting lots and lots of data that shows that there are certain areas that in our brain that are involved in task solving, right? And so in neuroscience, they don't tend to talk about multitasking. They talk about task switching. And these are the three major areas for task switching. Sure, we've got some low-level reflex circuits that do tend to operate a little bit more independently and more rapidly. But in anything relating to any complexity, there are three common areas that are involved in it, and they seem to be unitask, right? They work on integrating lots of information, solving a complex problem, and then moving on to the next one. There are 2 to 3 main functions that are involved in it. One is I'm going to load up the task. What's all the information I need to remember? The other big one is I need to start filtering out all the other information that was relevant to the previous problem I'm solving and start solving this problem. That's the big cost. It can be 18 times longer, right? What is the data showing now? Unfortunately, this myth of multitasking seems to be really true. The behavioral cost of task switching are typically unavoidable. Individuals will almost always take longer to complete a task, and they'll do so with more errors when switching between tasks, right? Kids say, oh, no, I can totally do that. I'm on my phone and I'm talking to you and I'm doing all those things. They're just taking longer and having more errors and doing all that stuff, right? It seems to progress throughout. It affects genders equally. There doesn't seem to be any of these myths that seem to hold. What does it mean in terms of costs? How costly is that? Unfortunately, it seems to mean it's 20 to 40% increased time with increased errors. That's the cost. Huge, right? So that means that your focused attention is super valuable. And you're like, no, but they need me to work in a complicated environment. So you're going to come back to them and say, oh, okay, what you're asking me to do is you want me to have Slack open and my email and be responsive all the time, and then you want me to solve interesting problems. Okay, so you'd like me to do shallow work, and you want me to take 24% longer, right? So it's going to be shallow, inefficient work. Oh yeah, not only that, it's shallow, inefficient, and tiring work. The amount of glucose required for you to do multitasking, this task switching, is far greater. You're going to leave the end of the day far more exhausted than if you had a day focused on a few select blocks with some shallow work time between it, right? So managing your time and attention is probably one of the most valuable things you can do, no matter what kind of work you do, right? Not only can it change the kind of work that you do, but it can also radically improve the quality of your life. Right, into the techniques. This one is one that's taken me the longest to do, and often I'm hoping it'll happen here too, and I explain to people, they're like, that's so dumb, because it's simple, and you can use it all the time, and you can start using it tomorrow, right? And that's being intentional with your time. What I'm trying to say is that, even in constrained environments, I was doing 15 to 20-minute visits, 20 patients a day, and having to do all the notes. And it was not under my control, right? I was just having people put on the schedule and they would be thrown all the time, come at different times. How are you going to deal with that, right? I have more control of my time and attention than I realized, right? And with a few simple techniques, I was able to change radically the amount of time I spend at the end of the day completing and trying to remember all this stuff from 2.5 hours down to 1/2 hour, right? That's the things you can do throughout your day. How do you do this, right? So One is you avoid rabbit holes, right? So we don't have a good, strong, we have multiple ways apparently of measuring time, right? So there's a lot of theories of how we perceive time. Some people call it kairos time as opposed to chrono time, kind of time. But our brains are responding to multiple inputs at different times. And so you might have perceived this yourself. In certain instances, time seems to go very slowly. There's lots of data that shows that happens almost all the time with fear. Right? I put you all in a roller coaster and I have you drop for 15 seconds and I ask you how long that took. That's going to be a long time. Hopefully there's some pleasant experiences that happens with too. Then there are other times, unfortunately it seems to be the most pleasant experiences, where time seems to fly by. We're not really good at estimating time when you ask us to do it because it seems to be there's some kind of attention gating. It turns out that there are, sadly, billion-dollar industries that are out there that make money by stealing your time and your attention. You might have heard of some. Does anybody know one of these? Instagram, Facebook. Yeah. So your time and attention across a year to Facebook is worth how much? $13 a quarter, right? This is in their annual budget, right? It changes by countries. That's true for other organizations. I think that your time, the amount of time spent on Facebook in a year, is worth far more than that if you were able to reclaim it. That I think is proposed. How do you do that? For now on, there's 5 and 10 minute timers, right? I'm going to ask you to change your relationship with timers, right? We spend a lot of time. I was like, why would I spend so much time reinventing a timer here on the computer and the laptop? And the goal is to say, I want to make it as easy as possible for you to decide and then set a reminder for yourself to say, I want to spend 5 minutes on this. I'm going to go and check my social media. I haven't been able to talk myself out of it yet. I've scheduled 1 hour a week, but I'm not there yet. I need 5 minutes. I'm going to set a timer, right? And you don't have to use our timer. You can use any timer you have. You just set a timer and you say, I'm going to spend only 5 minutes. When the timer goes off, I'm going to be called back to attention because I know that I'm going to get sucked into this thing. Emotionally, they've got all these pulls on me. And now it flashes. And then I say, great. I didn't want to spend more than that time. I'm going to shut down. Most of the time, I'm going to do 10 minutes on email. I'm going to do 10 minutes on email, scan it, make sure there's nothing urgent, then I'm going to put it away. Okay, I'm in the middle of responding to an email, the 10-minute timer goes off. Okay, 5 more minutes, and then I'm going to be done. And it doesn't take, I don't always finish on exactly the time, but I'm getting much better, right? That's the goal. Change your relationship with time, and in things that you know are going to distract your attention, set an intentional timer. The 5 and 10-minute timers can give you a lot of your time back, right? For most people, it's almost an hour to an hour and a half a day. The next one is doing deep work. We're going to get into this a lot more in the second session, right? But this is the stuff that's going to really move forward anything intellectual that you do, any complex things you're going to do, grant writing, moving your product forward, reaching out, being able to understand or research somebody before you reach out to them. It's going to be doing deep work. Deep work takes time to get into, and you have to set the environment for it. Nowadays, we have to start training ourselves to do it. So I have a 45-minute timer for that. A 25-minute Pomodoro time is not enough for me. I've got these startup costs. I turn off my notifications. I've got my headphones on. It's on silence. I'm focused. I've loaded up all the information that I need. It's at least that. Many people will hopefully be getting into like 3 or 4 hour sessions. Set a timer for yourself, something you can remind yourself, I committed to doing this. You're going to start feeling the need to like check your email, make sure nothing's in Slack for you, but you just say, no, I made a commitment to this. I'll do it when the timer goes off. That's the way I've been able to retrain myself to do it. The other way that very small time can make a huge difference is in taking real breaks. That picture that I showed you of the functional MRI, there's the part that was really glowing is in the prefrontal cortex. That prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that really seems to integrate and do a lot of your problem solving. It's also one of the most massively integrated parts of your brain. It's got connections from so many different centers. That's the part of your brain that in the shower gives you your best idea. Right? The reason you need true breaks is that as long as that center is involved in solving a task for you, it doesn't do any integration work, right? So you need to give it time. After a small period of time, for me, it's been around 45 minutes. So I'd get up, take a 5-10-minute break, just walk away, set things down. Make sure that, this is also what we'll get into in golden time, is you're going to relax. You're not going to solve something else. You're not going to just quickly slide into an audiobook. You're going to give that part of your brain a time to relax and do integration for you. This is why when I do planning, and I'm working with people to do planning, I ask them to plan their next day the day before. But then when you show up in the morning, I always ask them to have done it in pencil first, because when they come in the next day, they're going to have a new insight many days about what's most important next, right? And that matters. So taking real breaks matter. You'll find that during the day, all of a sudden, you've gone for a 5-minute walk at lunch. You set a timer, because if you don't, within 1 to 2 minutes, you start thinking, should I get back? Should I get back? JD, hopefully it's been helpful for you to set a small timer and then say, I'm just going to let the time be there. I'm not going to worry about it until I'm there. I've found it very relaxing. And then you're going to find that you come back from lunch knowing that you should restructure your day. And then the final one is this procrastination buster. Does anybody suffer with doing chores that you know are important but perhaps don't do every day? Yeah, okay. So for me, it was this button. It's the 10-minute chore row. So this is a 10-minute chore timer. I must confess that sometimes it's the 5-minute one. And the goal here is I can do almost anything for 10 minutes. Sometimes only for 5 minutes, but I can do almost anything for 5 minutes. More than 50% of the chores that I need to get done can be done within 5 minutes. 80% can be done within 10 minutes. Once I've started a chore, I almost always want to come finish it. So this has been the greatest procrastination buster for me, which is doing 1 5 or 10-minute chore a day. You really get to tackle some of the most important stuff. So that's the procrastination buster. That's what you can get by being intentional with your time. The other big one is to design your time, right? I think this is the admonition, plan your day. Yeah, but it's possible to over-plan your day, and then it's overwhelming the very moment you sit down. There are ways to do this. We're not going to get it into a lot of detail today. It's a big part of the deep work session, right? There's some good patterns with deep work. There are some anti-patterns being things like almost everybody is an over-optimistic scheduler. There's some techniques you can use that can radically change the amount you get done in the day. A simple one can change the amount that I was completing in a day from not completing 40% of my tasks to completing almost everything. So we'll talk about that in the next session. But we do have this design your time template, which includes some of the stuff from Cal Newport's with a time blocking column, but with a few other things that I've learned from neuroscience as well. Decluttering your mind, right? So you first say what's on your mind and you declutter, then you replan your day, right? Because you've learned a lot of what the other things that I'm going to do, with a column for replanning it later in the day, which matters a lot. And then a stuff to quickly capture things that are on your to-do list that you want to just get out of your mind. It's available from us. We're happy to send it out to you after this, along with the recommended book list and other sessions. It does include time blocking, and I would say that Cal Newport's really promoted this. But I would ask, how long has time blocking been around? And does anyone know what this is? So this is a time blocking calendar, clearly, from 1793. Sorry, that was when it was published. It's Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, and he'd been using it since that time. It has a powerful impact. I use slightly more nuanced time blocks when I'm planning out my very next day, but he was very specific about designing his time and using it throughout the day, I think to good effect. We won't get into today, but this is one of the most powerful things that will give you back your time in the evenings and the weekends, right? And this is doing an effective shutdown ritual. Most people get this wrong. I do and have. And that's really this idea that what you need to do at the end of the day is to convince yourself that there's nothing left undone that day or unplanned for tomorrow. Then you can get your evening back. It takes time. In the beginning, it takes over an hour to do this well, but you'll eventually get it down to 25 minutes. This is well worth reading about. We'll do a little bit more on this in the deep work session as well. I'm going to just end now. I'm sorry, it looks like I've left us with 5 minutes for discussion, but this exploration of golden time, right? And this is the impact technique. This is the thing when I'm working with people to say, how are we going to maximize your impact? I work with them to teach them this. Golden time is this final row, right? All of the blocks here and all of these timers have a single color, hopefully gold. And what is it? It is the permission to do personal and professional playtime, right? How could this be evidence-based? I'm crushing it in my hustle culture startup. The reason is that there's no greater time wasted than on something that's never going to be used, right? Or something that you're not going to continue. And you need personal and professional playtime to use this massive integration engine that you have in your brain to say, I want to work on something that doesn't require a fixed outcome, so I can be open-minded, right? But that I think is interesting and exciting, because your brain is busy feeding you information to say, this seems important, this seems important. We almost never spend time or get time to do that. Do any organizations in the world offer this? And has anything good ever demonstrably come out of golden time for organizations? Does anybody know?
So I know some organizations like Google have 20% time working on their own project.
Yeah. Google, 3M, Pivotal Labs, and another organization have all used it. What has come out of 20% golden time? So the 20% golden time is that they give all of their engineers the opportunity to spend 20% of their time on a personal project, right? What came out of golden time? Gmail came out of it. AdSense, the business of Google came out because the CEO at the time posted a sticky note saying ads suck. Right? Engineers used some of their golden time and came up with a different way to do it. There are tremendous and lots of different ones. The same is true for our lives, right? You need personal and professional playtime. If you have a partner, you need to work to make sure that you have the permission to do it for both of you. And then at work, it matters, right? So I help people to measure this, to start with just 5 minutes, work up to 45 minutes, and then ultimately 4 to 6 hours for everyone once a week. That's my goal, all right? So the goal today was to say, look, it's a very simple concept, but you need to change your approach to how you approach timers. They're not constraining or punishing. They're a way for you to control your time and attention. And to change the idea of constrained time. I work with people to try to make them happier with the amount of work they're doing in 8 hours and include a shutdown ritual. And then after we've gotten to a good place there, I look at them and I say, how can you do this in 6 hours? That always clarifies your focus and saying, what's the value I'm providing? Because you're not being paid for the time generally, not at least by an enlightened boss, but you're being paid for the value you're providing. Tim Ferriss, of course, took this to the extreme with 4-hour work week, but it's very inspiring, right? So we'd love you to find a way to get all the complexity in a serene space. All right. If everybody has a few more minutes, I would love to just spend 5 or 10 minutes with everyone, just talking about problems or hearing ways that you've solved a really cool approach to maximizing your impact with cool techniques. Does anybody have any burning questions? Please.
Hi, I'm Natalie Ayes. I'm a literacy coach in Cambridge Public Schools. And today I got my day back because I was supposed to be at an all-day meeting, and I'm like, I'm gonna go to my office. I closed the door. I normally leave it open, but I notice every time someone walks past, I'm going up, and that takes away from my productivity and focus. So I closed my office. I played some music. I need to get one important thing done, and I didn't get it done. And I'm like, what the freak? I had the whole day to myself. I had a meeting with my supervisor that was really important. And so it was whatever time she was available. That was in the middle of my day. So it kind of broke. I think I had an hour to work on this project. And then I met with her. And then I went to lunch. And then from lunch, it was so hard to get back my mind into work. And I knew I was coming here. And I think I pushed myself to do maybe 30 minutes more on that project. But I'm like, Natalie, you had one goal. What happened? And so I loved one of your points about avoiding rabbit holes. I'm like, yeah, I think I fell into every single one today. So, from reflection, I know that turning my phone off and silencing has worked, and maybe I didn't apply that today, but I don't know if you have any suggestions. I just felt like, oh my God, so when I saw this, I'm like, I need this because something didn't add up.
Great. A very common problem, I would say. First, wisdom of the crowds. Who has a solution, something that works for them?
Pomodoro you mentioned Pomodoro technique, but that's a good, I like the Pomodoro technique because you're able to, intentionally set out these time periods where you're working on something, you have 20-minute block of direct work, and then you take a 5-minute break, and then you think you do 3 blocks of 20 minutes, and then you give yourself kind of a longer break. And so it does help organize your workday into digestible,
not impossible.
Yeah.
One's great. Chunking it. Time blocking. I love it. Time blocking.
It's chunking, but making sure that the breaks in there really. It's almost like 10 more minutes and I get 30-minute break.
Yeah.
You know.
Do you also have a technique? How? Because I think you'd also mentioned you started to do it. You put your phone notifications on, but like other environmental things that people do that really help them focus. I think that was a little bit. And then the other one is like, how do you signal focus time to others? And then the third problem was, how do you not break up your day when you're waiting for something from somebody else? All big problems. Does anybody have a good technique for the first of those? Like, how do you set the environment for focus for yourself? Yes.
The order of tasks.
The order. Okay, great.
Yeah, if you have the prioritized queue, I feel like that helps a lot with making sure, but easily goes out of priority when things,
You're very responsive. How do you prioritize? She had a priority. Priority number one was speaking to
time, whatever's due first.
All right, great. Any other techniques for focus?
Yeah. Hi there. In the company I'm working at, they have within the last year or two said, okay, we're going to change the start of meetings from on the hour or half hour to, if it's an hour meeting, 10 after. So that gives everyone an actual break for 10 minutes, no matter what. And the other thing is, if it's half-hour meetings, it's 5 minutes. But but that's the thing. So that's I've come to appreciate that.
Oh, great, great. So that 10 minutes is when you get your actual work done? Is that right? I'm just joking.
Get work done, or go to the bathroom, or try and prepare for the next one. But you actually have that.
Wasn't it nearly impossible? People had no problem organizing 8-hour days of Zoom with no break. I had somebody facilitating 6-hour session in which they were expected to be on Zoom the entire time, which was outrageous. So a technique was to help create an organizational approach so that there's some awareness of that. Sounds great. Any other?
So one of the things I try and do sometimes is sort of manufacture a sense of urgency for myself. One of the companies that I run takes about a half of my time, but I can easily just let that sort of bubble into the entire week. And so what I've told myself is I'm going to, on Tuesday, do everything I need to do to keep the programs moving forward and support the company, and then leave the rest of the week for other things. And invariably that doesn't work. So, a meeting will get stuck in on Friday and other things will overflow into the week, but it won't take up the entire week. And on Tuesday, I feel like I really have to get through to keep that commitment to myself. There's a sense of urgency to do that so that there is space to focus on other things.
Great. And then you have like some great celebrational break at Tuesday. I really like this one, actually. I've started using a variant of it myself, which was coming in the day and saying, how could I get done the most valuable things today in 1 hour? Because if I did that in 1 hour and the rest of the day was like, I'm sort of like hanging out, it could be enriching time, right? It's a huge challenge to me all the time, which creates that focus for me. Could you have written to your boss and say, here's what I'm going to do. Tell me if you have a problem, right? And then get onto the next thing and then say, like, I'm going to be done with that. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the day learning something new. Or it doesn't always work, right? I can't always do that. But it creates a clarifying focus of what is most valuable for me.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up? I like the manufacturing urgency. How do you hold yourself accountable to that? Like, if sometimes like you're not able to meet the everything done on Tuesday.
It's a constant struggle. Yeah. I'll let you know when I figure that out.
I had a thought there too, like in terms of holding oneself accountable, having someone else hold you accountable. So telling your coworker, your friend, like, I'm finishing this project by tomorrow, check in with me, and like setting either an incentive, whichever way you're motivated. If you're like, if I finish it, let's go get a drink. Or if I don't, like, I don't know, whatever bothers you the most. Yeah, like I'll buy you a drink, whatever works for you. I think letting someone else know is helpful for me.
Great, thanks. Anything else? Yeah.
To clarify, I think that there's a lot of false deadlines. So getting rid of the false deadlines, I guess is what I was trying to say, is for the prioritized queue.
Great, great. We'd worked on this and I've used it a bunch myself and then for others, which is, I don't know if any of you have had this challenge where at the end of each week, I never felt like I won. I always ended the week with more things to do than I had done. And one weekend I realized probably even my kids felt this way. So I started switching it. Largely it was because I set too many high expectations for myself. And I had this infinite digital task list that could just keep accepting my wishes for it. And then I'd prioritize it, sure, but I'd still be feeling bad. And in that time, I started switching to solid and stretch goals, right? So this idea was a solid goal has very strict criteria around it, right? And those strict criteria are, I only get 2 to 3 a week, right? So I'd have to bump something and it goes into my stretch category. It's not. The solid goal has to be, I have blocked off enough time to do it well. Because if I didn't say it on the well, I would almost always block off just enough time through some miracle. If everything worked well, I would finish it. Right? That was how most people are doing planning. But the idea is, like I said, I blocked off enough time to do this well, right? Not only did it give me more time, right? But it also helped me to look forward to it because I like doing things well. I don't like doing things when I have to finish it just so that I can get on to the next thing, right? So that was criteria number 2. And I think the third criteria was I was in control of all of the steps of it. And if I wasn't, then I set expectations around, if I don't hear back from them, this is what the outcome's going to be, right? And it lets me communicate clearly to people when I can actually deliver it based on other people's responses, which is most of the time I found what people are expecting. Not that you do it by this drop-dead date. There are very few things that are like that, but you do it by some reasonably expectable date, and you communicate consistently about that. That was the big change. All of a sudden, when you finish up your solid goals by Thursday or Friday morning, all of a sudden you start winning your week. It was really hard to narrow it down to 2 to 3. I tell you, I started with 5, and that was a tough week. Great. Other questions? Okay. All right.
So my to-do list is actually a grid. I don't know if others are familiar with this, but the top left quadrant is what's urgent and important. The right top quadrant is what's important but not urgent. And then there's last are things to delegate. They're not really urgent or important to you. But the important yet not urgent things, so these are the passion projects often aligned with our deepest values, most commonly get put on the back burner. So these are like the golden hour playtime. So how can I convince myself and others to prioritize golden playtime?
Great question. So I'll look for answers there. It's sometimes called the Eisenhower matrix, I think. Yeah. Great. There's some nice graphics online that will sort of guide you through this if you need to. So who has, does anybody have, how do you get to the important but non-urgent tasks, which are arguably the most impactful? Right? Especially how do you keep things out of the important urgent column, which is not the fun place for it to be. Do you have the way?
I don't. I wish I did.
Okay. All right. Yes.
I have the same problem, but one thing that I think has been pretty helpful for me is to sort of get the ball rolling on the important but not urgent thing enough that you're essentially, I mean, sort of what you were talking about a little bit, what I call kind of blackmailing yourself into deadlines, right? Where you have enough other people involved, or you have like an example of where I did this was, starting to talk to potential funders about that project, right? So there's other people involved. They have certain expectations of me that sort of blackmails me into sort of keeping that going and making sure I make time for it. So maybe that's sort of artificially moving it into a different quadrant. But if you're accountable to other people suddenly on that and not just to yourself, it becomes much easier to prioritize that and make sure that it doesn't just stay in that quadrant forever.
Great. Thanks, Noah. Anyone else have something that works for them? There is actually an article online, which I can send you after, about this particular one, because those tasks are arguably the things that, if you got them done sooner, you learn a lot more from them. Have you tried scheduling them? Like, is the reason you can't do them is because like you come to the day and all these urgent things pop up in your email and you spend the entire day?
I'm an obliger, so if I don't have accountability to others and it's just my own passion project, it becomes less important to me.
Okay. So I actually worked with a team of people. They were in the fundraising department, and they also became the events department when the events department left at a major university. And because they were so successful, right? They were trustworthy, they were obliging, they responded to things, and now all of a sudden they had more work to do than a single team could do. For them, I think the goal was that we worked together to create a permission to do this to block off deep work time. We did that for a few weeks, and then what happened was they had a deep work time blocked on their schedule. They then had permission from themselves to say like, oh, this is the time when I'm going to focus on this. But what happened was that it almost always got given away because there was always something like semi-urgent coming by. And the urgency was really centered around somebody asked you for it. And this has got a term that Cal Newport really talks a lot about in A World Without Email called the hyperactive Hive-Mind. And it has the most powerful explanation of why email is so stressful to us, right? And the reason is because we're social creatures who evolved in a time where there was a period of time in history for us, many tens of thousands of years ago, arguably, when all of a sudden it was less likely the saber-toothed tiger that would kill us and more likely the person who lived in the hut next door. And all of a sudden we had to be very aware of social cues, our importance and position within the group, right? And there's arguably a whole bunch of evidence showing that that's why we develop such complicated brains, because there are so many cues that you have to process and respond to. Email takes all of that obligation and gives people a super easy way to enter our door all the time. You know, some groups that have had a way to like revert back to a much more pleasurable experience related to this was because they just said, look, we're not going to use email for this week. If you have an issue, come to my door. But that was enough of a cost barrier. So the amount of communication dropped 20-fold, right? They didn't leave the week feeling much less productive or effective, right? When the first email system was introduced, within a week, the communication, the amount of communication happening in the organization had increased 10-fold. And there wasn't just that amount of additional information there, but this idea that we do this interacting response. So with this group, that was enough for it to undermine scheduled time for general important non-urgent work. What changed it was when I asked them to say, design your week such that you've always got some times blocked out to do this kind of work. And then at the beginning of the week, put deep work / what are you doing there? Because that was enough of a commitment to say like, there's some urgency to this for me. And that made a big difference for it. That and establish some team norms. But yeah.
I'm just thinking of two things. I don't know if it'll be helpful. I had a productivity coach who had this phrase called hour of power, and it was how you first started your day. And so the idea was to work it into your morning routine, and it was that structure to schedule your golden time. And so it's the first thing you do, and I tried it for a while, and it was just, and it felt really great because it was something that I cared about, you know? So that was one suggestion. And then the other one is I think sometimes it might be, sorry, I'm like talking right into your face, sweetie. It might be helpful to change the story we tell ourselves. So I get to work really early, like around 6, 7, and I go to bed around I'm supposed to go to bed around 9. And I feel like I'm the only one who does that, and it's really hard to do. And then I found like other colleagues also do that too, right? And I saw a YouTuber online, and she was like, someone asked her, how do you keep your morning routine and how do you wake up at 4 a.m.? And I'm like, no one else does that. And she does it. And I just saw a picture of who I want to be. And I was like, well, she's telling herself she can do it and she's doing it. Why can't I do it? And so like we have to change that story that we tell ourselves, that narrative that we walk in, and that like if this is something important to you, do it. And like the person asks, like, how do you do it? And she goes, like my time is non-negotiable. I make time for myself. And like that type of phrasing just kind of helped me shift my perspective on that.
Thank you. This is a time management session. We are at time. I'm sorry to call it. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much for your interaction. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Harley, do you want to say anything anymore? Yeah.
Sure. Just thank you, everyone. There's a sign-up sheet that went around. If you weren't able to sign in, we'd love to just capture everyone that was here and send out materials if you're interested. I believe it's over here on the other side. So please sign that, especially if you want to get any communication from us or from MakeTimeFlow. But thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks. And I'd also invite you, MakeTimeFlow platform is in closed beta. So if anyone's interested in joining us as a beta user, we're very happy to work with you. And maybe if you just put you can either go to maketimeflow.com and just add your email there, or you can indicate that on the sign-up sheet. Okay. Thank you very much for coming, everyone.